The Americans took over the Philippines with big promises: democracy, education, and most of all, English. But what if I told you that their biggest cultural weapon didn't actually work, at least at the start? While American schools were teaching English, another language, Spanish, was quietly gaining more ground than ever. And we know this thanks to one man who told the truth: Henry Jones Ford. Henry Jones Ford wasn't some crank outsider. He was a respected political scientist, a Princeton professor, and a close advisor to President Woodrow Wilson. In 1913, the United States sent him to the Philippines to evaluate how their colonial experiment was going. What he found was not what Washington wanted to hear. In his book, President Woodrow Wilson, The Man and His Work, he mentioned the following about the Philippines, which shows just how astute and forthright he was.
The Filipinos regard American rule about as we should have felt about French rule if, during our Revolutionary War, the French government had seized the opportunity of taking possession of America for itself, taking the position that the best interests of the people required that the French language and French political institutions should supersede the native variety in order to establish more advanced standards of culture.
He continues,
As a matter of fact, the Filipinos, like other Oriental peoples, have a very ancient culture of their own, with a marked literary and artistic polish. Moreover, they have been long in contact with European culture. As a region of civilization, the country is older than the United States. Permanent Spanish settlement began over 40 years before the first English settlement at Jamestown. The Filipino gentry speak Spanish and the masses speak native dialects which are not low languages, but are refined and capable instruments of thought, producing poetry, drama, and romantic literature, although deficient in science.
in reference very likely to the way American colonial authorities such as Dean Worcester depicted Filipinos, he had this to say.
The national manners are courteous and refined, and the exhibition of members of savage tribes as Filipino types gives about as fair an idea of the Filipino people as would be given if blanketed Indians were exhibited as specimens of the American people. The civilized Filipinos number over 7 million, and the wild tribes between whom and the civilized people there is little contact number about 650,000.
So we can safely say that Woodrow Wilson was well acquainted with the circumstances happening in the Philippines, going by what his special advisor, Mr. Henry Jones Ford, was writing in 1916. Now, the American plan was simple: replace Spanish with English. They opened thousands of schools and sent hundreds of American teachers, known as the Thomasites, to make English the national language. However, Mr. Ford writes,
It will probably be admitted that to change the mother tongue of 7 million people is a formidable undertaking. It was sought to be accomplished by the importation of 1,000 American school teachers, although the actual number in the service at one time never reached that figure. The school teachers did accomplish wonders, as the present writer can testify from personal observations made in every part of the archipelago. Indeed, in every branch of service, the staff of American officials has a record of achievement that affords impressive evidence of the energy and adaptability of American character. But at the same time, the project of converting the Filipinos into American citizens who may someday be safely entrusted with political institutions of the ordinary American type has been a complete failure, and perseverance in the attempt can only lead to increasing irritation and eventual disaster.
So clearly, the results were, shall we say, mixed, and this allowed the use of Spanish to continue. Ford's 1916 book also included this jaw-dropper.
Statistics based upon school reports have been published indicating encouraging progress in the spread of English as the common language of the Philippines, but such statistics are fallacious. As well might the number of pupils receiving instruction in Latin in our schools be taken as an indication of the extent to which Latin is spoken in the United States. As a matter of fact, Spanish is more than ever the language of polite society, of judicial proceedings, and of legislation. More people are speaking Spanish than when American occupation began.
That's right. Spanish was actually expanding. English wasn't taking root, at least not yet. It was being memorized in schools, but not spoken at home, in the markets, or even in government offices. It takes at least perhaps a generation for a language to take root. And Mr. Ford was writing in 1916, still quite early in the American colonial regime. So Spanish wasn't just the language of the colonizer. It had become the language of power even before the arrival of the Americans. The Filipino educated class used it, especially the ilustrados, who use it in law, literature, and revolution. Jose Rizal wrote his novels in it. Even the Katipunan, while founded in Tagalog, had many members who communicated in Spanish. Ford realized something that Americans did not. People weren't rejecting Spanish, they were using it to assert their identity. English, meanwhile, was stuck in the classroom. Outside the cities, few could use it fluently. Teachers drilled grammar, but the language never took root in everyday life. Mr. Henry Jones Ford writes,
This disposition reacts upon the quality of English when it is used. Outside of circles in such close contact with American officials as to feel the influence of their example, the Spanish vowel sounds are used, with the result that one could hardly recognize as English what purports to be such.
In most provinces, local dialects, or shall we say languages, dominated. And when Filipinos did need a common language, they still turned to Spanish.
A fact that is conclusive as to the actual state of the case is that although there are over 40 native newspapers and magazines in the Philippines, not one of them is published in English. The regular form is a Spanish section and a dialect section.
Mr. Henry Jones Ford also notes the irony of a people being described as illiterate when they could read and write in their own languages, but could not in English or Spanish. He writes,
As an incident of the educational scheme, literacy qualifications for the suffrage were confined to those who could read and write either Spanish or English. This provision, while designed to stimulate acquisition of English speech, had incidentally the effect of propagating grave misrepresentations of the situation. Attention has often been called to the fact that the qualified electorate is an extraordinarily small percentage of the adult male population, thus indicating that illiteracy generally prevails. But this is not really the case, and it appears to be so merely because natives who cannot read and write a foreign language are officially classed as illiterate. Probably it is the only instance in history in which people who can read and write their own language are classed as illiterate. As a matter of fact, the Filipinos have a talent for literacy, and even among the peasantry who have only native culture, ability to read and write is a common accomplishment.
Let that sink in. He said that Filipinos have a talent for literacy, and even among the peasantry who have only native culture, ability to read and write is a common accomplishment. So why are people surprised that Filipinos were educated, that they were literate people even while not ilustrados? Is it any surprise at all that Filipinos could speak Spanish if they were educated? So here's the myth, that the Americans easily replaced Spanish with English in the Philippines upon their arrival due to the work of the Thomasites and because of their English language policy, as some quarters would like us to believe. In fact, we have these words from Mr. Henry Jones Ford.
Step by step, the government has been forced to take action making practical admission of defeat on the language question. It was enacted that English should be the sole official language after January 1, 1906, but sheer pressure of administrative necessity compelled postponement first to January 1, 1911, and then to January 1, 1913. For something over a month in 1913, English was nominally the only language accepted in judicial proceedings or in government business, but as a matter of fact, the requirement was absolutely impracticable. The administration got out of a painful dilemma by the Act of February 11, 1913, which declared English to be the official language of the Philippines, but that Spanish should be an official language until January 1, 1920. The terms of the act are simply a strategic veil cast over a decisive defeat on the language question. The postponement to 1920 is in effect an abandonment of the struggle to force English into use.
So here's the truth. The Americans tried but failed to erase Spanish. In fact, it became more entrenched because it felt the need that English could not in 1916. And Henry Jones Ford saw that. However, something did finally cause Spanish to eventually decline in the Philippines. But that's a topic for another video. Meantime, hit that like button and subscribe to continue supporting our channel. Viva los Filipinos! Mabuhay!